I've replayed that weekend in my mind 1,000 times. The sunlight, the laughter, the fake smiles. And the way it all ended, with silence, headlights fading, and me standing on the side of a road in another state, holding nothing but disbelief. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes wrapped in familiarity. In the voices that once sang you happy birthday. In the hands that helped you blow out your candles. My name's Daniel. I'm 33 years old. And I used to believe my family and I were close. We weren't perfect, sure. We had our fights, our moments of distance. But blood meant something to me. It meant loyalty. It meant no matter how messy things got, you didn't turn your back on your own. But that belief, that innocent, naive trust, would die on a cold Sunday morning somewhere in the middle of Tennessee. It started as a simple trip. My younger brother, Adam, had just gotten engaged, and my parents decided the whole family should go up to their cabin near Nashville to celebrate. It was supposed to be a long weekend, family, barbecues, a little hiking, some fishing. The kind of thing that sounds wholesome when you talk about it but always ends with passive-aggressive remarks and awkward silences. Still, I said yes. Part of me hoped maybe this trip would fix what years had strained. My parents and I had grown distant after my divorce last year. They didn't approve of how I handled it, walking away, refusing to fight for someone who had already chosen someone else. They thought I gave up too easily. My brother sided with them, as always. He'd call me stubborn, cold, selfish even, so maybe I went on that trip to prove them wrong, to show I was still part of the family, to remind myself that no matter how complicated things got, there was still something worth salvaging. The morning we left, the air was sharp and wet. It had rained all night, and the world smelled like fresh dirt and pine. I loaded my bag into my brother's SUV, nodding at him while he scrolled through his phone. He barely looked up. Mom hovered nearby, giving me that half-smile she always used when she didn't want to start an argument. Dad was already in the driver's seat, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, impatient as always. There was no warmth in the car, just small talk, the kind of surface-level conversation people use to avoid saying what they really feel. I looked out the window most of the drive, watching the rain blur into streaks against the glass. The hum of the road was oddly calming, almost enough to drown out the tension. Every now and then, I'd catch Adam whispering something to his fiancée in the back seat. She'd laugh quietly, the kind of laugh that hides a secret. Mom would look at them and smile, proud, affectionate, and I'd feel this tightness in my chest. That used to be me, I thought, the golden child, the one they bragged about. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost that version of myself. The cabin was beautiful in a lonely sort of way, tucked between two rolling hills, surrounded by tall pines that made the air smell clean and cold. Inside, everything looked the same as when we were kids. Old furniture, faded rugs, photos of family vacations hanging slightly crooked on the walls. That first night was fine. Dinner was filled with polite laughter, a few memories, some teasing. But beneath it, I could feel it, the undercurrent of something sharp. When I spoke, there was always a delay before someone responded. When I mentioned work, Dad sighed like he already disapproved. And when Adam's fiancée joked about my quiet phase, everyone laughed. Too loudly, too long. It wasn't mean-spirited exactly, but it didn't feel right. It felt like the kind of laughter that's meant to remind you of your place. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee, watching the fog rise from the valley below. The world was still. For a brief moment I felt peace. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Adam. He leaned against the porch railing beside me, arms crossed. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at the view. Then, without turning to me, he said something that stuck. He said, "You always make everything so serious, man. Can't you just loosen up once in a while?" His tone wasn't cruel. It was almost casual, the kind of thing you could shrug off. But it stung, because it wasn't about that morning. It was about me, about how I carried myself, how I reacted, how I'd changed since the divorce. I remember feeling a quiet kind of anger, the kind that doesn't explode, it just simmers. He walked away after that, and I stood there, staring into the fog, realizing I didn't belong in that picture anymore. Over the next 2 days, the little moments piled up. Adam's jokes about how I couldn't survive a day without Wi-Fi. Mom's offhand remark that I should really get out more. Dad's comment about how men should learn to take a joke. It was like being slowly erased from your own family. Like they were testing me, pushing buttons just to see how much I'd take before I snapped. I kept quiet. I smiled. I told myself it was just family teasing. But something about the way they looked at me, the way they whispered when I left the room, felt deliberate. Then came the hike. On the last day of the trip, Adam suggested we go exploring, drive out to a nearby trail that led to a lookout point. He said it'd be fun. I didn't want to go. My body was tired, my patience thinner than ever. But I didn't want to be the one who said no. So I went. The drive was long. 2 hours of winding roads and empty fields. When we finally stopped, the air was colder, thinner. The trail stretched ahead, narrow and rocky. We hiked for about an hour, reaching a small clearing with a view of distant mountains. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that made silence feel sacred. Everyone took photos, laughed, and rested. Then, at some point, Adam said he and his fiancée would head back to the car to grab water bottles. Mom followed them, saying she needed to make a call. Dad stayed behind with me for a few minutes, staring out at the mountains. Then he said, "Don't be long," and started walking back too. I didn't think much of it. I stayed a while, taking in the view. The air was so quiet, it almost felt like time had stopped. But when I finally turned back and started down the trail, something felt wrong. The woods looked different on the way down. No voices, no sounds of footsteps. Just the crunch of gravel under my boots and the whisper of wind through the trees. When I reached the parking lot, it was empty. No car, no note, nothing. At first I laughed, genuinely laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. A let's mess with Daniel moment. They'd probably parked down the road or gone to grab lunch, I thought. But as the minutes turned into an hour, and my calls went straight to voicemail, that laughter died in my throat. The sun started dipping lower. The air turned cold again. I sat on the edge of the lot, staring at the empty space where the car had been. My family had left me there, in another state, with no car, no bag, and no idea where I was. At first, I refused to believe it. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe the car broke down. Maybe something. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't an accident. This was something they thought would be funny. Something to teach me a lesson. And as the daylight started to fade, and my phone battery dropped to 10%, one thought kept echoing in my head. Let's see if he can handle this on his own. That was the moment the warmth left my chest for good. The moment I realized that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who'll test your breaking point. I sat there in that empty lot, surrounded by silence and miles of nowhere, and felt something in me shift. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. For the first time in my life, I saw my family exactly as they were, not as I wished they'd be. And I knew then, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after they left was almost physical. The kind that presses against your chest, heavy and constant, like you're underwater. For a while, I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the empty parking space where their car had been. The last of the daylight was fading fast, and the wind had picked up, rustling through the trees. My phone said 6:42 p.m. The battery was down to 8%. I remember opening my messages, typing something like, "Where are you guys?" Then deleting it. I didn't want to sound desperate. Not yet. Instead, I just sent a single word. "Really?" No reply. 10 minutes. 20. 40. The cold crept up my arms, and that first chill of fear started to set in. That's when the realization hit. They weren't coming back anytime soon. Whether this was a joke or a test, I was on my own. I walked to the edge of the lot. There was one narrow road leading out, barely wide enough for 2 cars. No signposts, no sound of engines, just the faint chirping of crickets and the low hum of the wind. The nearest town, according to my phone, was about 10 miles away. 10 miles. I laughed when I saw that number. Not because it was funny, because I didn't know what else to do. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets and started walking. The gravel crunched under my boots. My breath came out in small clouds. Every now and then, I'd glance back, half expecting to see headlights, my brother's stupid grin, my dad shaking his head, the whole family laughing about how they got me. But the road stayed empty. 2 miles in, the first car passed. A pickup truck, headlights cutting through the fog. I waved my hand, but it didn't stop. Just honked once. A sharp, indifferent sound, and kept going. By the time I reached the halfway point, my legs ached, and the night had swallowed the last of the light. I used my phone's flashlight to see the ground in front of me, but even that began to flicker. 6% battery. That's when I started to think about why. Why would they do this? Why go this far just to make a point? The last few days replayed in my head. Adam's smirk, Dad's offhand remarks, Mom's forced kindness. It all felt connected now, like they'd been setting this up from the start. And the worst part? I realized they probably thought it was harmless. Just a prank. A joke to toughen me up. But standing there on that dark road, I didn't feel like the punchline to a joke. I felt like the target of something cruel. Took me 4 hours to reach the town. By then, my phone was dead. My feet were blistered, and my jacket was soaked with sweat and cold air. It wasn't even a real town, just a cluster of buildings. A diner, a gas station, a cheap motel with flickering neon lights. I walked into the diner, head down, trying not to look as miserable as I felt. The waitress glanced at me, eyebrows raised, and asked if I was okay. I nodded, said I'd been hiking, and got turned around. She gave me a strange look. The kind that says she didn't believe me but didn't care enough to ask. I ordered coffee and sat by the window. The place smelled like burnt toast and old grease, and the fluorescent lights made everything look pale and unreal. That's when I noticed the payphone near the door. I dug through my wallet and found a few coins. I called my dad first. Straight to voicemail. Then Adam. Same. Then Mom. This time, the phone rang twice before cutting off. I stared at the receiver for a long time before putting it back. They knew. They saw my calls. And they were ignoring me. I got a room at the motel across the street. The sheets smelled like bleach and dust, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear someone snoring next door. Lying there in the dark, I kept staring at the ceiling, waiting for my phone to buzz. For some kind of message. A joke. An apology. Anything. Nothing came. I kept wondering what they were doing at that moment. Were they laughing? Sitting around the fire? Drinking? Saying, "He'll figure it out"? That thought hurt more than the walk. Because it meant they weren't worried about me. They didn't even see what they'd done as wrong. It wasn't just a prank. It was a message. A reminder that I wasn't one of them anymore. The next morning, I borrowed the motel's phone to call a taxi to the nearest bus station. The driver was an older guy with a southern drawl, quiet but kind. He asked where I was headed. I told him home. He didn't ask why I looked like I hadn't slept. Didn't comment on the dried mud on my jeans or the fact that I didn't have a bag. He just nodded and turned up the radio. When we reached the station, I paid him and stood outside for a moment, staring at the long stretch of buses and the line of people waiting to board. It felt surreal, like I'd slipped into someone else's life. The ride home was silent. 5 hours of landscapes blurring past, my reflection staring back at me in the window. Somewhere between the hills and the city skyline, I realized something that made my stomach twist. They wouldn't even think they'd done anything wrong. In their minds, this would be something to laugh about at the next family dinner. A story to retell. Remember when we left Danny behind? Man, that was hilarious. The thought made me sick. When I finally got home, my apartment felt different. Emptier somehow. I sat on the couch, shoes still on, and just listened to the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about calling them, about yelling, demanding answers. But then, I didn't, because deep down, I already knew what they'd say. They'd tell me to lighten up. They'd say it was just a joke. They'd make me feel like I was overreacting. And maybe that's what scared me most. That part of me would almost believe them. That week, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty road, the fog swallowing the trees, the fading sound of their voices. I started checking my phone compulsively, half expecting an apology. 3 days later, a message finally came. It was from Adam. Just 3 words. "You made it." No apology. No explanation. Just that. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. All I sent back was, "Yeah, thanks." He didn't respond. That was the moment the shift became permanent. Something inside me hardened. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. I stopped trying to make sense of them. Stopped expecting warmth from people who only knew how to play cold. But even as I tried to move on, the silence between us grew louder. Because silence, when it comes from family, doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like punishment. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't over. There was still a part of me that wanted to understand, to confront it, to hear why. Because people don't just abandon someone they love, unless there's something darker underneath it. And I was about to find out just how deep that darkness went. A few weeks passed before I heard from any of them again. Long enough for the ache to fade into a dull, quiet resentment. The kind that sits just beneath the surface of everything you do. I went through my days like nothing had happened. Work, gym, home, sleep. But no matter how normal I tried to make it, something in me stayed on edge. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped, and hated myself for hoping, that it would be them. That maybe someone had realized what they'd done. That maybe there'd be a real apology waiting. But there never was. Until one evening, a notification popped up from a family group chat I'd muted months ago. A new message from Adam. A photo. It was him, Mom, Dad, and his fiancée, all smiling around a bonfire at the cabin. The caption read, "Round 2 this weekend. Who's in?" That's when it hit me. They'd gone back to the same place. The same place they'd left me stranded. And they were celebrating it. I stared at the photo for a long time. Their faces looked happy, carefree, almost glowing in the firelight. There was no guilt, no awareness, just comfort in what they'd done. I didn't respond, but something inside me shifted again, sharper this time, because I realized this wasn't just about a prank. This was about control. They didn't leave me there to be funny. They left me there to prove a point, to remind me where I stood, the outcast, the too serious one, the one who couldn't take a joke. And somehow that made them feel closer to each other, bonded through humiliation. The next weekend, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. I didn't plan it. I just found myself there, pulling into their driveway, staring at the same house I grew up in. The curtains were open. The living room lights glowed warm and soft against the evening dark. For a moment, I sat in the car, hands gripping the wheel, trying to find the courage to walk in. I wasn't there to fight. I just wanted to understand why they did it. Why me? When Mom opened the door, her face froze for a second, just a flicker of surprise before she smiled. That carefully controlled kind of smile that hides discomfort. She invited me in, her voice light, almost cheerful. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. The familiar scent of coffee and old furniture, the hum of the TV in the background. Dad was in his recliner, flipping through channels. He barely looked up when I entered. Adam wasn't there, but his fiancée's laugh echoed faintly from the kitchen, like she belonged there more than I ever did. I stood there, surrounded by all that normalcy, and felt like a ghost in my own house. Mom asked how I'd been, if I was still keeping busy. Her tone was casual, almost rehearsed. I wanted to believe it was genuine, but the words caught in my throat. So I said the first thing that came to mind. I asked if they remembered leaving me at the trail. The silence that followed was thick, not shock silence, but the kind that comes when people decide to pretend something didn't happen. Mom's smile faltered for half a second before she brushed it off. She said I was being dramatic, that it wasn't that far, that I made it back fine, didn't I? She said it was supposed to be funny. Dad just shook his head, muttered something about always taking things too seriously. That was the moment I felt the final crack form. Because it wasn't just that they didn't apologize. It was that they didn't think they needed to. To them, my fear, my exhaustion, my anger, none of it mattered. They'd rewritten the story in their heads. Now, I was the uptight brother who couldn't handle a joke. They were the harmless pranksters who'd just gone a little too far. I left without saying much. The drive home was a blur. Streetlights streaking across the windshield. Music low enough that it barely filled the silence. When I got back, I poured myself a drink and sat in the dark, letting the ice melt slowly in the glass. That's when I saw it. A notification from Adam. He'd posted something on social media, a short clip. I shouldn't have watched it, but I did. It was filmed that weekend at the cabin. Shaky phone footage, their laughter echoing over the sound of the wind. In the video, they were telling the story of the time we left Danny behind. They were laughing, really laughing. Adam said something like, "We told him we'd be right back, but we just drove off. You should have seen his face." Mom was laughing so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes. Even Dad cracked a grin, saying, "He probably thought we'd abandoned him for good." And then, the part that made my stomach twist. Adam looked straight into the camera and said, "Let's see if he can handle being on his own for once." I froze. My chest went tight. It wasn't just a prank. It was humiliation, filmed, shared, and laughed about. A performance. And I was the joke. The clip had over 100 comments. Friends, cousins, random acquaintances leaving laughing emojis, saying things like, "You guys are savage," or "Poor Danny," and my family responded to every single one. Joking, smiling, loving the attention. It was like watching strangers wearing my family's faces. I replayed the video over and over, each time feeling smaller, more detached. Not because of the act itself, but because of how easy it was for them. How easily they erased my humanity to make a story worth telling. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in my apartment felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, the distant traffic. It felt like the whole world was breathing around me except for me. Around 2 a.m., I got up and went to my desk. I opened my laptop and typed their names into the search bar again, just staring at their profiles. Smiling faces, family photos, a life that looked perfect to anyone who didn't know better. I scrolled through months of posts, vacations, parties, inside jokes, and somewhere in there, buried beneath all the smiles, I started to see a pattern. A trail of comments and captions I'd never noticed before. Little jabs, subtle digs, jokes about me being too quiet, too soft, too serious. Even before the trip, I'd been a running punchline in my own family. That realization hit harder than the night they left me, because it meant this wasn't a one-time thing. It was years in the making, a slow, steady rewriting of who I was, until even I started to believe it. The next morning, I called Adam. He didn't answer, but he called back a few hours later, voice casual, light, like nothing had happened. I told him I saw the video. I told him it wasn't funny, that what they did wasn't a prank, it was cruelty. He went quiet for a few seconds, then sighed. He said I was blowing things out of proportion. He said it was just content, that everyone knew it was a joke. And then, the part that broke me, he said, "You should actually be grateful. People finally think you're interesting." The line cut through me like glass. That was the moment I stopped expecting anything from them. No remorse, no empathy, just a bottomless well of denial disguised as humor. I hung up, and as the dial tone faded, so did something else. That small, aching part of me that still wanted their approval. What was left was calm. Cold, clear calm. Because now I understood. They weren't just testing me. They were trying to break me, to prove that I couldn't survive without them. But they were wrong. Because that night, sitting alone in my silent apartment, something inside me finally woke up. Not anger, not revenge, just resolve. If they wanted to see whether I could handle being on my own, then I was about to show them exactly what that looked like. When people talk about revenge, they imagine chaos. Yelling, confrontation, broken glass, maybe even a satisfying explosion of anger. But that's not how it really happens. Real revenge is quiet, it's patient, It's the kind that moves through silence like smoke, invisible but suffocating. After that phone call with Adam, I didn't reach out again. I didn't block them. I didn't post about it. I just disappeared from their narrative. They wanted to test if I could survive without them, so I did. First, it was strange. The habit of checking in, of answering messages, of pretending I belonged. It all takes time to die. But once it did, once the silence settled in, it became something else. Peace. I started spending weekends driving out of the city, alone. Not to escape, but to breathe. Sometimes I'd pull over by an empty field or a lake and just sit there, engine off, watching the world go quiet. I remember one morning in particular. The sky still half dark, the air cold enough that my breath fogged up the windshield. I sat there with a coffee thermos in my hand, watching the first light creep over the horizon. It hit me then how long I'd spent trying to earn people who were never going to see me. I used to think family meant unconditional love. But it turns out some people only love you under certain conditions, as long as you play the role they've written for you. And once you stop playing that role, you become the problem. A month went by before Mom called. Her number flashed on the screen while I was at work. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, but something made me answer. Her voice was light, almost cheerful. She said they were planning another family get-together. She said it would be good to have everyone together again. There was no mention of what happened. No apology. Just an invitation like everything was fine. I didn't say much. I just told her I was busy. The pause on her end said more than her words ever could. Then she said softly, "You're still upset, aren't you?" I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I just said, "I'm not upset. I'm done," and hung up. They didn't call again after that. But something unexpected happened a few weeks later. One of my coworkers, Jenna, mentioned she'd seen a video of me online. Her tone was hesitant, careful. My stomach tightened instantly. I knew what she was talking about before she even said it. She told me she stumbled across a funny family video on social media. My name tagged in the caption. It had been re-uploaded by a meme page, shared thousands of times. When she showed me, my hands actually shook. There it was, that same clip of my family laughing about leaving me stranded. Edited, captioned, plastered with laughing emojis and text that read, "When your brother can't take a joke, face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy." Hundreds of thousands of views, thousands of comments, and all of them laughing at me. Something inside me went still. Not angry, not humiliated, just numb. But that numbness didn't last long. Because right there in the comments section, buried under the noise, was something that changed everything. Someone had commented, "Isn't this the same guy from that construction company ad? Pretty sure I've seen his name on their website." And suddenly, I realized, my work name, my reputation, my entire life outside of that family, had been dragged into their joke. That was the moment my silence ended. That night, I opened my laptop and started gathering everything. The original video, the reposts, the comments. I downloaded them all. Then I messaged Adam, short, direct, and calm. I told him the video had gone viral, that it was tied to my name, my face, my career, and that I expected it to be taken down immediately. He replied within minutes, defensive, dismissive, said I was overreacting again, that it wasn't that serious. I didn't argue. I just forwarded the message thread and the video links to a lawyer I knew through a client at work. A week later, Adam called me. His voice wasn't cocky this time. It was nervous. He said something about not realizing it would spread, about people taking it the wrong way. I told him it didn't matter what they meant. What mattered was what they did. The video came down a few days later. The meme pages removed it after being contacted legally. But the damage was already done, not to me but to them. Word spread in their circle, their friends, their coworkers, their church community. People started asking questions about what kind of family would leave someone behind like that, then laugh about it. And in a small town like ours, questions travel fast. Mom called again. Her voice was tight this time, not angry, but scared. She said I'd made a mess, that people were talking, that I'd taken things too far. I let her finish. Then I said something I'd never said to her before. I told her that actions have consequences, and that if they wanted the world to laugh with them, they could also live with what came after. There was a long silence on the line. Then she said, in a voice almost breaking, "We were just trying to teach you to loosen up." I closed my eyes, pressing my thumb against my temple. And in that quiet, something inside me settled, because I finally understood it had never been about love. It had been about control dressed as concern. They didn't want me to loosen up. They wanted me to bend, to break, to conform to their version of who I should be. And when I didn't, they decided to humiliate me into it. After that call, I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt free. I stopped waiting for their validation, stopped defending myself against their narratives, stopped explaining why I chose peace over their chaos. I started living my life like they didn't exist, and for the first time in years, it actually felt like mine. I started sleeping better, started running again in the mornings, started laughing, not loudly, but honestly. It's strange how healing doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from distance, from watching everything burn quietly behind you and choosing not to look back. Months later, I heard from a cousin that my parents and Adam had stopped talking to most people about me. They'd become the subject of whispers, their perfect image cracked. Apparently, Adam deleted all his social media. I didn't feel satisfaction, just closure, because in their attempt to make me look small, they ended up exposing themselves instead. And me? I learned that silence, when used right, can be the loudest kind of revenge. Still, there are nights when it creeps back in. That image of me standing in the empty parking lot, the sound of nothing but wind and my own heartbeat. But now it feels different. That version of me, scared, waiting, hoping, doesn't exist anymore. Because I finally learned that you can't be stranded if you no longer wait for someone to return. It's been almost a year since that trip, since the moment they drove away laughing, leaving me alone on that cracked asphalt road. And sometimes, late at night, I still catch myself wondering what would have happened if I hadn't walked away that day, if I'd let it go, if I'd gone back, if I'd forgiven them like I always used to. But then I remember the silence of that night, the wind cutting through the empty parking lot, my phone flickering in the dark, the taste of betrayal so sharp it made my throat ache, and I know the answer. I would have lost myself. And no matter what anyone says, no family bond is worth that. When you grow up in a house like mine, you learn early how to play along. You laugh at the jokes made at your expense. You shrug off the comments that sting. You let the teasing slide because, deep down, you believe that's just what love looks like. Took me 27 years to realize that love doesn't humiliate you. It doesn't test your strength just to prove a point. And it sure as hell doesn't leave you stranded in another state to see if you'll crawl back. After the video was taken down, I thought maybe I'd feel vindicated, like I'd finally won. But that's not how healing feels. It's quieter. It's not a shout. It's a whisper that grows a little stronger each morning when you wake up and choose yourself again. I stopped checking their social media, stopped wondering if they missed me, stopped imagining them talking about me at family dinners. Because the truth is, they probably still do. But I've learned that it's not my job to correct their version of me anymore. Everyone sees you through the lens of what they need from you. They needed someone to laugh at. I needed to finally stop letting them. A few weeks ago, I drove past the old rest stop on a work trip, the same stretch of highway where it all happened. It looked smaller than I remembered, quieter, almost harmless. I parked the car and stepped out. The air smelled the same, dry asphalt, pine, and distance. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun go down, until I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. It was like standing in front of an old photograph, blurry around the edges, still familiar, but no longer alive. That version of me, the one who begged for their approval, was gone. And all that was left was someone who finally understood what it means to be at peace. People always say family is everything. But I think that phrase only works when family doesn't use love as a weapon. When it's not conditional. When it doesn't come with a punchline. Because family isn't blood. It's consistency. It's safety. is someone who stays when things get ugly, not someone who makes you the punchline of their joke. I've built a different kind of family now. Friends who show up when they say they will. Coworkers who notice when something's off. A neighbor who checks in just to say good morning. People who don't test if I can survive without them, because they actually want me around. And you know what's funny? I've never felt more loved than I do now, surrounded by people who owe me nothing. There's one thing my mom said during that last phone call that stuck with me. She said, "We were just trying to teach you to loosen up." And for a long time I replayed that line over and over, wondering if maybe she was right. Maybe I was too serious, too distant, too cold. But now I realize I did loosen up. Just not the way she meant. I loosened the grip I had on people who kept hurting me. I loosened my attachment to needing their approval. I loosened my belief that I had to keep proving my worth to anyone. I didn't just loosen up, I let go. If there's anything I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes you have to be abandoned to finally find yourself. Sometimes being left behind is the universe's way of showing you the truth about who you've been chasing. And when that happens, you have two choices. Stay angry at the people who left you, or thank them for setting you free. I think I'm finally ready to do the latter. Because now, when I think back to that day, standing alone watching their car disappear, I don't see loss anymore. I see a beginning, the start of something real, the start of me. Final monologue for cinematic closing. They thought it would be funny to see if I could survive without them. They thought I'd panic, break, or beg them to come back. But what they didn't know is that leaving me there wasn't the end of me. It was the moment I finally stopped needing anyone who could do that to me. They left me stranded, and that's how I found my way home.